Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Julia Gunn, and today I'm going to be talking about my complex relationship with creativity. I used to train to be a concept artist for 10 years, so I know all about comparison, creative blocks, and perfectionism. And despite all the time I invested into making art, I ended up walking away from it completely. Creativity has always been my greatest passion and my biggest frustration. So my creative journey is anything but straightforward. So today I'd like to talk about why I quit and what I learned along the way. My creative journey started when I picked up a pencil when I was a little kid. My mom and dad taught me how to draw, and my first inspirations were Sailor Moon and Pokemon. I loved the style of the animation and the aesthetic. I loved the act of creation. It felt like magic. And gradually I started taking it more seriously. At first it was fan art of my favorite singers and actors, and then I was like, I want to learn how to draw from imagination. And I started learning anatomy. I would draw for hours on end, and I thought to myself, this is it. This is my purpose, okay? I honestly don't know where I got so much energy to make so much art, but I was relentless. I would draw for hours on end. During this time, I also posted my art on Tumblr, and people liked it, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of being undeserving of the praise. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. So by the time I was in high school, I was like, I want to be a concept artist. I had always loved video games, so this was a logical choice for me. And at the time in Russia, no one taught concept art, so I knew if I want to become a concept artist, I had to go abroad, right? So this is how I ended up in Canada. My first art school was called Toronto School of Art. We had a bunch of different classes like art history, printmaking, which I hated, still life drawing, painting, and it was everything I had imagined it to be until it all came crashing down. Only a few months after I arrived, the school went bankrupt. I still had my visa, so I stayed in Canada trying to find another school, and in the meantime I was drawing, sketching, making digital art, practicing my skills, and finally I found a school which was really suspicious, and I didn't pay attention to that at first, but which was a mistake. But this school had 12-hour classes, which was crazy, right? I didn't have time to make my own art. I was really tired all the time. And eventually the school turned out to be a scam because they didn't offer you a work visa once you graduate. Because this wasn't a government college, I had to quit. All my hopes and dreams were shattered when I had to go back home to fucking Russia. But I kept drawing, I kept making art. So I was doing commissions at the time, and I saved up enough to go to a concept art course in Montreal. That's where I met my friend who also wanted to be a concept artist, and we would draw in cafes and walk around Montreal, getting inspired by the architecture and the vibes. And of course, I didn't get married to a Canadian or found a way to stay there, so I had to go back to Russia again. And at the time, my mom offered me to go to a liberal arts program in St. Petersburg, and I did not want to go because the last thing I wanted to do was math or write essays. All I wanted to do was to create art, but I was stuck in this frustrating situation that wore me down endlessly. My passion started to fade. I kept making art for a while, but eventually the sadness and frustration caught up to me, and I stopped drawing completely. The passion I once felt had evaporated. And later I would go to Canada one more time for a graphic design course, but by then it was clear that something inside of me has shifted. So why did I stop drawing? So what started as a fun hobby slowly became my life purpose. I would grind for days learning anatomy, composition, color, and art was that one thing that felt right, that felt like it was meant for me. But unfortunately, things started to change when I started posting my art on platforms such as Twitter and Tumblr. I felt like my skills were never up to par, and when people liked my art, I felt like I was undeserving of it. I compared myself to other artists whose styles were so different from mine. This person does incredible color, and this person is so good at anatomy, and this person's characters are so fun. How do I combine all of that and still be me, right? And don't get me wrong, I love my Twitter art community, everyone is so supportive, but the constant comparison drove my creativity into the ground. And since I wanted to be a concept artist, the constant self-criticism and judgment was all-time high. I wanted to make fully rendered, beautiful illustrations with armor and weapons and lights and creatures, but deep down I didn't care for that stuff, you know? I love doing fan art, I love drawing my original characters, and I actually didn't care for that CG stuff, which was destroying my creative flow. I found myself obsessing over perfection, relying on paint over and references to try and make my work look flawless. But in the process, I lost something crucial. I lost my personal connection to art. I spent so much time chasing perfection, I forgot what it's like to just create for the joy of it. As I mentioned, I did graphic design for 2.5 years in college, and my time there was absolutely dreadful. Not only I hated the classes like typography and web design and all that other stuff, but I also felt really lonely. And the reason why I chose graphic design was because you need art foundation to do graphic design, and I already had that, so I thought I could pivot. But that didn't work out. I did have my multicultural friends sitting on a grass moment. I actually didn't like any of those people, and I didn't want to be friends with them. They constantly belittled me and laughed at me, and I just felt like an outsider. So that wasn't exactly a happy moment for me. And after doing art for so long, graphic design seemed like a watered down corporate take on creativity. It wasn't about joy of creation anymore, it was about efficiency, branding, and meeting the demands of clients. I began to realize that my love for art wasn't something that could be contained within the boundaries of graphic design. It was something that needed space to breathe, something that needed to be raw, untamed, and free. But at that point, it felt like my passion was buried under layers of frustration, self-doubt, and burnout. I didn't know how to get back to art that once brought me so much joy, and I felt like I had lost my way. And sometimes I think to myself, what if I was still drawing now in this TikTok and Instagram era of art, you know? I often look at artists who feel the pressure to post content consistently, and I think to myself, would my creativity survive in such conditions? Would I still feel like making art knowing that someone out there is making better content and better reels? What I especially dislike about the current era of social media art is that artists feel the need to be performative with their work. It's like it's not enough to just sell the art, you have to sell the experience of making it. I often see videos where artists splash around paint or dance or do some weird shit before they start actually painting the piece. And to me, it feels like it's just not enough to be an artist anymore, you know? And then there is a CG art community, and it has always been anonymous, right? So you didn't have to be extroverted or charismatic or a TikTok clown. You just had to be talented, right? You just had to be talented, or you just had to work hard, and this is how you gain subscribers and followers, right? But these days I see CG artists, for example, critiquing their subscribers' works for views. And I get why it happens, algorithms, engagement, visibility, but to me it feels like something has definitely changed. And I realized that I would probably burn out so fast in the current social media climate if I was an artist. And maybe that's what pushed me away from art. The growing realization that creativity is no longer about creation. It's about branding, it's about keeping up, it's about turning your art into a product before you even have a chance to enjoy it. When I stopped making art, it took me years to find my creative spark again. Even though I wasn't drawing anymore, I found new ways to express myself. I pivoted into writing and content creation. And of course, I'm only at the start of my journey, but it feels so good to create again. And one of the most defining things that helped me get back on track with my creative pursuit was astrology. I studied my natal chart, and I learned that one of the biggest challenges in this reincarnation for me is creativity. And this really made me feel seen and understood. I have Saturn in Pisces in the 5th house, which means I have to take my creative journey really seriously. Saturn represents structure and discipline, and 5th house represents creativity. I often wondered, why do I struggle so much with content creation and writing and getting myself out there? And the answer is Saturn in the 5th. My creativity is something I have to take seriously, something I have to build with structure and intention. And instead of resisting that, I am learning to work with it. Diving into spirituality has also helped me to reclaim my creativity. I started seeing creativity not just as a skill, but as energy, something that flows through me, rather than something I have to force. I learned about divine feminine, intuition, flow, and ease. I even started channeling poems and communicating with my higher self. And it wasn't just about self-expression anymore, it became a form of connection to myself, to the universe. Through this, I realized that creativity is sacred. It's not just about making things, it's about allowing something beyond your conscious mind to flow through you. Of course, spirituality is not a magic pill, and I still struggle with comparison and burnout, but it did give me a different perspective on making art. And as someone who had this wild creative journey in my life, let me tell you that perfectionism and self-criticism are the silent killers of creativity, okay? Being critical of your art doesn't make you a good artist, it makes you a miserable one. Imagine there is a child in front of you and it's trying to draw something, and you're just standing above the child and you just go like, okay, this is wrong, why you're drawing this is ugly, what are you doing? And of course the child is not gonna want to draw anymore, right? So this is the metaphor for your inner artist. So you are basically killing it with your criticism and your self-judgment. Just allow yourself to explore and grow, okay? Not only as an artist, but as a person. And this doesn't mean that you have to make bad art, right? There has to be a balance, and I know all about that because, as I mentioned, my Saturn in the 5th house wants me to take creativity seriously while allowing myself to play and explore and express myself, right? And it's a tough edge to walk on because in my early years, I pushed myself to be the best at what I did. And unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way that self-love is a crucial aspect of creativity because it allows you to nurture your inner artist rather than driving your creativity into the ground. When you're constantly pushing for perfection, you don't give yourself space to evolve, okay? And there is also this opposite perfection of creativity that you're not supposed to like force it, you're just supposed to like channel it or like let it flow through you. And I feel like both of those statements are wrong. It's neither one or the other. Creativity is a thing that also requires effort and skill, right? I'm only at the beginning of my YouTube journey and my delivery and editing are in baby stages. And every time I sit down to create a video, I go through 1 million stages of self-doubt. I feel like everything I do is pointless anyway, and no one's going to watch my video. And you guys, I record on my iPhone 10, right? So who's gonna watch a video recorded on iPhone 10? And I'm also kind of insecure of the fact that I'm not a risk queen and that I can't show my personality on camera. I have to remind myself that if I don't go through shit stages of starting a YouTube channel, then I won't become the risk queen that I so desperately want to be. The real challenge isn't in mastering a skill, but in allowing yourself to be bad at something again, long enough to get good. And let me tell you, it's really hard to start my YouTube journey when I already had the experience of being good at something. Even something as simple as talking on camera feels impossible. I don't trust myself to talk without a script and much less improvise and show my personality. I have this deep-seated fear that if I don't plan everything out, then I'll mess up or come across as dull or uninteresting, or that my English is gonna suck. And transitioning from one form of creativity to another, let's say from art to writing, is like a shock to the system. It's like I'm back at square one, being a beginner all over again. Suddenly, the instincts I relied on don't apply anymore. I have to rebuild my creative intuition from the ground up, learn what works and what doesn't. It's humbling. And the worst part, the finished product never matches my taste. It never lives up to the vision in my head. And sometimes the creativity does flow effortlessly. Like while I was writing this, I suddenly got an idea for a reel, even though I promised myself I'm not gonna make any reels on Instagram. Sometimes it's easy, and that's what I call creative flow. And it's a moment of joy. You don't have to struggle, you don't have to force anything. The thing about creativity is that it doesn't always have to be a fight. The learning curve sucks, and yeah, sometimes you'll cringe at your own work. My first reels were absolute dog shit, and I was so embarrassed of them, I decided to archive them altogether. But the moments when creativity flows with ease are something that makes creativity so addicting. When I started out my creative journey, I hated writing scripts. I didn't put any effort into my early videos, thinking I was just supposed to yap and be entertaining. But creativity takes effort. Yes, some people channel books and music and it's effortless for them, but for me, creativity takes work. I don't rely on inspiration anymore because it's fleeting and ever changing. And the thing is that creativity gets easier with time. Like, I never imagined myself writing 4-page scripts, but now I know that I can do it. Practice helps me become a better writer. And I still struggle with ideas for my videos. Some days my brain is just empty. But the more I write and brainstorm, the easier it gets. So if you're struggling to create, remember, it's not always gonna be this hard. Keep going, keep making, and eventually it's gonna feel like second nature. This is it for my video. Thank you so much for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed my yap. I want you all to sit your ass down today and create something cool, okay? Drop me a comment, like my video, and subscribe, as always. Okay? Bye!
With the lights out, it's just dangerous. Here we are now, at a dance.